So, my name is Zuri Berry. I'm the digital strategy editor at the Baltimore Banner, but I'm also an owner and principal producer of ZMC Podcast, a podcast development and audio production company. I've been in the news business for almost 20 years now, having worked in newspapers, TV, radio, and now in a digital only outlet. So, I'm pretty grateful to be here, given that waves of the industry that we've all been through. And I do want to set the stage for this conversation. But first, I guess a couple of announcements before we really get into it. I'd like to thank the Pivot Fund for having me here, as well as our esteemed guest, whom you'll get to hear from plenty in just a moment. So thank you, Tracy Powell, the Pivot Fund's esteemed CEO. I'd also like to thank the Knight Foundation for supporting and sponsoring this publisher series. Second announcement here being that we're going to hold all questions until the end of the webinar. That's on me. I'm going to make sure there's plenty of time to answer everyone's questions. So please use the Q&A function here on Zoom to add questions as we go, and I'll pick them up at the end. And I guess with that, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. We're having this conversation about capacity building and organizational design at a moment in which the media industry is going through tremendous flux. Frankly, there's been a lot of layoffs and cuts, and not all of it can be directly attributed to the journalism. In fact, plenty of cuts have happened in places where the journalism is actually resonating. It's actually meaningful to the communities that they serve. But somehow in this business, there's still a disconnect. With our business models, our budgets, and our need for staffing, there's clearly a problem here about how we set ourselves up for success and how we maintain that success by the ways in which our news organizations are built. So in the midst of all this, we're also seeing a wave of capacity building journalism funded through organizations like the Pivot Fund, like Press Forward. And it's on these organizations, the founders of the newsrooms they fund, to help ensure that their investments and grantees are sustainable. So we're going to tackle this issue head on, and we're going to talk about finding talent. So let's kick this off by hearing from our panelists. I'm going to start with Lisa Snowden. She is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Baltimore Beat. That's a digital and print-based news organization. Lisa, can you tell us about yourself and what makes the Beat stick out in Baltimore? And if you could, let us know your organization size.
Sure. Our organization is very small. We have right now, we have, including myself, 2 full-time staffers. We are, thanks to the Pivot Fund, bringing on a 3rd full-time staffer in just a few weeks, starting in April. And we have a few contract and part-time folks. We also use freelance writers. So the Baltimore Beat was born out of the death of Baltimore City Paper, which was the city's about 40-year-old alt weekly. We knew that the city still needed that kind of journalism perspective, that deep dive journalism, very serious arts coverage, very critical stance on leadership in Baltimore. But also we knew that it needed something that was more intentionally Black, like something that intentionally reflected the folks who lived in Baltimore. Baltimore is a 60% Black city, and as is no secret, journalism is a very white industry. So the audience is not always reflected in the newsroom. So we were kind of trying to kill 2 birds with one stone, really fill that need that an alt weekly provided, and also make sure that we are giving voice and opportunity and training opportunities to established journalists of color and up-and-coming journalists of color.
Thank you, and welcome. Second, I want to go to Madeleine Bair. She is the founder of El Tímpano, an award-winning civic media organization designed with and for the Bay Area's Latino and Mayan immigrant communities. Welcome, Madeleine. Can you tell us about yourself and what makes El Tímpano so important to Bay Area immigrant communities?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm a journalist and media developer. I have a background in both community media, as well as more traditional journalism, independent filmmaking, and international human rights. And I'm from Oakland and started El Tímpano in 2017 when I moved back to the Bay Area after I'd been away for many years, and I saw that Latino immigrants were the fastest growing community in my hometown, but you would have no idea of that by consuming local media because they were nearly invisible in local media and in civic conversations on issues impacting them. And at the same time, there was a dwindling of, already very limited options for quality journalism, news and information that spoke their languages and addressed their needs and concerns. So I founded El Tímpano really to address that gap in journalism that both serves and amplifies the voices of Latino and Mayan immigrants in the Bay Area. And in terms of this conversation, we didn't have any ongoing funding or ongoing staff, including myself, until 2020, when I was able to step down from my day job in the fall of 2020. I was our first full-time employee. We had a part-time employee as of the start of 2020, but it took us another year to raise the funds to hire our second employee, which I did in early 2022. And we're now a team of about 13 people.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I was just reading a story actually on your site from Vanessa Flores, a nice profile of a young woman struggling to pay her bills. And I just think that's such impactful journalism. So looking forward to learning more about your organization. Thank you. Susan, I want to come to you now. Susan Gluck Pappajohn. She is a talent and organizational strategy consultant. She's a seasoned executive whose career has spanned the arts, nonprofit, technology, and media sectors. Welcome back, because this is, I think, another Pivot Fund webinar that you've done. Can you tell our audience more about yourself and the types of clients you work with in the media sector?
So I focus entirely on nonprofits, mission-driven organizations, organizational design, strategy, and recruiting. The last 4.5 years, I started to work in the nonprofit news arena with nonprofit, mostly startups or very young nonprofit newsrooms across the country, maybe 15, 16 of them. I'm just launching the CEO search for a Sahan Journal. So if anyone has any nominations or ideas, let me know. It's not just really about recruiting. There's a lot of organizational assessment that needs to happen before people go to market and say, who's the next hire we really need? So we'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm happy to be here.
And we're happy to have you. So I guess this leads to our very first question that is of significance here, which is just about building these newsrooms. In addition to funding, as the leader of a local newsroom, and this question is posed to Lisa and Madeleine, what are some of the key things that you've learned about the recruiting and hiring process as founders? Lisa, why don't you kick us off there?
It's really been a journey. And I think that because it's been a journey, your needs shift. So the Baltimore Beat started as a for-profit with one staff. We relaunched when we just decided, myself and my co-founder, we're just going to do this. And then it was the two of us. And then when we got a substantial grant, we were able to relaunch again with a staff of, at that point, three folks. So we ran for a little bit and 2 folks ended up leaving. And so then we've had to kind of think about it from, what do we need next? And we need a lot all the time. We're small places. But for me, I knew that the next thing that we needed was help on the news side, because one of the folks that we lost was a news writer. And so I was in the position where I was writing things, and that cannot happen. As much as I love writing, and as much as being a reporter and writer has been a big part of my career, I don't have the luxury of doing that right now. So for me, it was knowing that, and then being intentional about making sure that it's always in the front of my mind. How are we making sure that the Beat still reflects the audience that we're serving? So even if it's not necessarily hiring somebody who is African-American, it's making sure that they're aligned with what we want to do. And also that we still have a pipeline open for when the next hire is ready, when there's more money that comes into the door, that we're ready. We're grooming folks to come in and be available and ready for us to make that next hire that could be, that could be an African-American person. I want to be clear also that we don't just hire African-Americans, we hire everybody.
Well, let me just underscore what you said there. In alignment, meaning somebody of and for the community and all of those things, right?
Absolutely.
Like clearly somebody who is a good representative for Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. Madeleine, can you answer that question?
Yes, I have learned so much and I'm continuing to learn. So very much will learn from my peers on this panel today. As I mentioned, we've hired about 12 people in the past 2 years. And before making our first hire, that I really didn't know what I was doing. And so I want to kind of distill just a few of the top learnings. And I can elaborate later if there's a desire. But, I think the first thing I learned is just you can't do it yourself, which is hard to say for, one person or 2 people teams. I thought when I was making my first hire for Tímpano, I thought I had to do it myself because I didn't have any colleagues at that point. But you really need to hire with a committee because you just want to hear different perspectives. Different people may have questions that you don't have, concerns that you don't have, see things that you're not seeing. And so, after I've learned that with, early on in that process, I did put together a committee, and even when we didn't have the people on staff, I looked towards El Tímpano's advisory council. I looked towards my network and said, hey, we're making this hire. I'd love for you to join the committee. Sometimes I even offered a stipend if they weren't on our advisory council just to thank them for their time. And people were very much willing to support me in that process. The second thing I learned is that hiring is really a year-round process. You can't just wait until you have a position and you're ready to start searching. So, one thing I've done is I have a virtual whiteboard with the dream candidates. And I'm always on the lookout if I see great work, if I meet great people. I try to take informational interviews when I have the time, even if we don't have a position open. Really just to keep a running list of great people who we might want to bring on to the team when and if there's an opportunity. The third is that, hiring, you really need to be proactive about it. It's about so much more than just creating a JD and throwing it up on a bunch of job boards. That's why there are people like Susan who do it full time. It takes a lot of time. So you have to really think about it, about a hiring process as a project and create a plan, have a kickoff meeting. Now when we are planning for a hire at El Tímpano, in our first kickoff meeting as a hiring committee, we brainstorm together, okay, who are dream candidates for this role? Who are other people who might know other dream candidates who aren't on our radar? Who's going to reach out to those people? And, if you're one of my dream candidates, you probably know because I'm not bashful. I will be up in your DMs. I will be writing emails and say hey, we'd love for you to consider this role. And if not you, can you share it with people you know? And then finally, and this goes along with what Lisa was saying, fit is such a part of it. I'd say the few times when we've made a hire that didn't work out, it was because it wasn't a great fit for El Tímpano. And for us, one of the biggest things that has meant is in terms of fit is it's not just mission alignment, but it's also we're a small and growing nonprofit, essentially a startup. And so we're looking for people who are ready to grow with us, ready to build, ready to really roll up their sleeves. And so that may mean that, the person with the most experience isn't necessarily the great candidate if all of their experience has been in organizations where there are already systems set up. but we're looking for people who, are ready to kind of fill in gaps or create systems and processes and aren't really afraid to do that.
Yeah, just to reflect on that really quickly, I'm like in a startup, if you will. And I think there's a big hurdle there for people who aren't accustomed to being in a place without systems in place and processes and, sort of process for all of these things that you might take for granted, for instance, filing expense reports. It seems to be the last thing that sometimes founders think about. Um, I want to follow up with a question about sort of bringing the people on your staff, though, there. How did you go about hiring people who don't look like you, but look like the community that El Tímpano serves? What did you learn during that part of the process?
Yeah, there are a few ways to answer this question. To be clear, I'm white, I'm not Latina, I'm not an immigrant. And so it has always been a commitment of mine to build an organization that really does reflect the communities that we serve. It's even more important because I myself, as the founder, I'm not from that community. And so, long before we had any funding to hire, our work really started by building relationships within Oakland's Latino and Mayan immigrant communities and designing our mission, designing our strategies, really in collaboration with the community itself. And Latinos, immigrants, and Latino journalists saw that. It didn't matter that I was white. It mattered that we were doing journalism that they wanted to do or they wanted to see because of their own experiences as immigrants or as children of immigrants. And so long before I had any funding to hire people, I started receiving cold emails from Latino journalists who wanted to work with El Tímpano and sent me their resume. And, those were the first informational interviews that I took. And so I think that really shows that, integrity and actions really speak louder than a DEI statement. People will see your work and your values. And if that aligns with them, then they want to be a part of that. And so just doing the work has really helped attract people who are from the communities that we serve. But apart from that, we've also established processes to support equitable hiring. So, we know that people of color are more likely to be paying student loans. We know that immigrants or children of immigrants are more likely to be supporting other family members as adults. Carla Murphy did this great survey of journalists of color who have left the industry a few years ago. I could drop it in the chat. And a big part of it was simply that they couldn't afford the poor salaries that were paid in journalism jobs. And so, added to that, El Tímpano is based in the region of the country with the highest cost of living. So, people have told me, wow, you actually pay really well. But we pay so that, people can afford to work here. We also take into account the fact that, for a lot of newsrooms, speaking Spanish or being bilingual is a plus. For us, for most of our jobs, that's a necessity. And that does really dwindle the number of qualified applicants. So we really want to pay to account for that, to really take into account that skill that we're looking for. So pay is a big part of just making sure that we're able to attract the sort of people that we want to be a part of the organization.
Understood. Thank you for that. I'm going to pivot just a little bit, no pun intended. Susan, I wanted to ask you about the challenges, some of the common challenges that you see when you're talking to organizations about bringing people on and how to find talent. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I think what we have here is, I think, very much a startup kind of conversations with the panelists, etc. Most of the newsrooms that are young are started by journalists. And they tend to hire very much on the editorial side, and that's your core mission, right? And then they'll hire someone on the operations business side, but often that team or that person gets overwhelmed really quickly. There's not an understanding necessarily, because that's not what the founders did for a living, but how do you build the infrastructure and processes for an organization? So I see a bias towards the headcount growing very significantly on the editorial side, and then an underestimation of what it takes to put the infrastructure together, and a lot of pressure and stress on the business people who are the operations side of the house.
So what do you suggest as a solution to that? Because I think everybody's nodding their head in agreement.
Yeah.
That is an issue.
Yeah. So first of all, is to recognize that, maybe not hire as much on the editorial side, and you have to maybe make some hires or get some resources on the business operations side of the house. I've seen people say, okay, we need a fundraiser, we need operations. Well, we'll have the fundraiser do the operations too. It's overwhelming to people. So I think that recognizing that this is important too, and then seeing, well, what type of person do we need on the business side? Well, you have to look at who's your starting team. Are you just one founder? Are you two founders? Are you three founders? Is there someone on the starting team that has a little bit more experience in this area? People haven't talked about the board yet, recruiting a board. So I think there was an advisory board comment. Are you all 501c3s yet?
We are.
You are? Both of you?
El Tímpano is fiscally sponsored.
Fiscally. Okay. So whatever it is, you can also get people. I see a lot of the startup boards or advisory boards, also a lot of journalists, but maybe to target people in the community who can act as evangelists, but bring certain skills to the table. So that's recruiting staff, but that's recruiting maybe a lawyer who's in the community, PR person in the community, a finance accounting person on the community. So that's another way to start to get skills and insight. And just like you're talking about bringing a committee together for recruiting, that group of people can really be a sounding board and bring skills and resources to the table. Then it's like, okay, what's the next critical hire? Can we outsource it? So you don't need a full-time accountant per se, so figuring out, who you have on the team, who could maybe do a little of this work, what are the critical pain points right now on the infrastructure side, also recruiting board or advisory board members. So you're like putting pieces maybe in different places and not just be like, I'm hiring this one person to do everything. That makes sense at all?
Yeah. And thank you. I think there was a few gems in there in terms of utilizing board members, advisors, and people of that sort to help with some of these issues as well that come up in these newsrooms, particularly startup newsrooms.
I think the startup newsrooms, I really see the people on the business side get crushed. And it gets really stressful for them. And then ends up like as the newsroom can get burnt out too, because if there's not the infrastructure for them to do their job too.
Yeah.
So you're very much in this startup phase, but as you start to scale, going to 12 people really quickly, you start to have to get processes in place, and having a good operations manager is generally a good thing to hire for eventually. Who can manage some of the vendors or part-time consultants too.
Yes. Let me come back to you, Madeleine, here real quick, because you just dropped some stats in the chat, I think, here about your staff. your staff is now 95% BIPOC, 75% Latino, 95% women, 12% LGBTQ plus, and 50% either immigrants or children of immigrants. So very interesting. You recently expanded, as we just discussed. You're at 13 members, not all of your staff are reporters. What was your first step in rounding out the team? Did you have an initial vision in place? Can you talk to us?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, as Lisa said, like, you're trying to do it all. You need everyone at once, it feels like. We really built out our organization based on both our editorial and our revenue strategies, which are interconnected. And so for El Tímpano, that means that before hiring any reporters, we really hired outreach staff because that's really a part of our strategy, is really starting by building relationships with the communities that we serve, who then contribute to our journalism. And so our very first hire, even before myself, was a part-time community outreach coordinator who was out in the community every week, letting people know about El Tímpano, signing people up for our text messaging platform, and really growing our audience. And this was in 2020, when the sort of information that we were providing in Spanish was really life or death sort of information during the pandemic to help people navigate what was going on. When as I mentioned, once I was able to step down from my day job and be the first full-time staff member, it took another year to raise enough funds to cobble together to hire a second full-time staff member. And the person I hired, she actually just passed her 2-year mark with us. And she's very different from myself. She doesn't have a journalism background at all. What I really liked about her is that she has a background in nonprofit administration and operations. She has built things up. So she worked with a local community clinic and really kind of built a new arm of the community clinic. So I could really see that she was a builder. She also has a finance background, which I don't have. And so she just brought a lot that could really complement my skills. And she's worn like 4 different hats now, and has been so integral to the growth of the organization. So it wasn't until after she came on and really built our community outreach team, built a revenue strategy, and really started to lead and implement a revenue strategy that's attached to that community outreach, that we then had more funding that we could start to devote to the editorial side of our operations. And I mentioned earlier that I have, sorry, I'll just finish this thought, that I have a digital whiteboard of like dream candidates. I also have a digital whiteboard that I'm always kind of fiddling with of an org chart. And so I'm always kind of looking at, okay, how are we going to grow? What's the right time for this? Like right now, actually, we're hiring 3 people for the newsroom, which is really the biggest growth for our newsroom thus far. But part of it was because, we knew we wanted more reporters, but if we were only to hire the reporters, there would be too many people for our current editorial director to manage. And so we first had to hire a new managing editor. So just like kind of holding all of those pieces in place and having an org chart that you can really look at and continue to shape and reshape on an ongoing basis has been really helpful for me.
Can you tell us how you were able to find the funding to support that payroll and that onboarding process for those initial hires? I mean, you expanded pretty fast there. Where did you get that initial funding to get those kind of hires on board?
Yeah, that was hard. That's probably the hardest part. And honestly, what allowed us to make that first hire, or the second hire after myself for a full-time person, that was actually a major grant that we got from our local public health department. So because grants we were getting from at that point, we're mostly quite small, and it was very hard to kind of cobble together enough small grants or project grants, again, especially in the Bay Area when salaries are pretty high. It was very hard to cobble together enough grants to make a full-time hire. And so it wasn't until we got a major 2-year grant that has since been expanded to be a 3-year grant from our local public health department that enabled us to make that hire. And I've written a little bit about that, what has really become a big part of our growth and revenue strategy is civic partnership. So a lot of grants that we've received from government agencies, sub-grants from nonprofit service providers who really value El Tímpano's ability to reach, quote unquote, hard to reach communities with our work. And I can drop some of that in the chat as well.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Lee, I want to come to you here because the Pivot Fund recently made an investment of about $150,000 into your org. Now, you wrote that these dollars will support the Beat in securing a new staff member. How did you approach this process when you got the money? With a CFO and an arts and culture editor on staff, what skill sets were you interested in bringing to the Beat?
I was interested in somebody who knew the kind of reporting that we were doing. We're not like the Banner or even the Baltimore Sun, where you guys do a lot. I mean, you guys do a lot of everything, but like a lot of the daily reporting. So I wanted somebody who knew how to do kind of more featurey things, but also had an interest in doing investigative reporting. I knew that it needed to be news. Terry Henderson, who does our arts and culture coverage, does an amazing job. So that's set. I was thinking when Madeleine was talking about how much the hiring process feels like fundraising when you really think about it, because sometimes it's not just going out. Like you can't hire a fundraiser and think they're just going to go out and come back and bring all this money to you. Sometimes it's having a few in-face conversations with potential funders. It's looking at somebody who's like, okay, I see them funding these other organizations that are like us. How can we kind of start getting in there? So there's a lot of invisible labor that goes into fundraising. And I think that there's also kind of invisible labor that goes into hiring. So it's knowing the folks who are kind of aligned in that way, who are already doing that work. The person who we hired, when I sat down with her, even though she comes from a more mainstream journalism outlet, I was very, very impressed with how much she knew about nonprofit news and specifically the kind of nonprofit news that I did. And I was already familiar with her work. I'd seen her at other conferences. So I knew that we were both kind of on the same vibe with that. And that really went a long way with feeling like I could trust her with our news coverage.
There goes that word again, alignment. I love it. We've heard it a few times here. I want to sort of hit on another aspect of this. And this question is for Susan. So there are several hyperlocal BIPOC-led news orgs that have been supported by the Pivot Fund. Again, they're all sort of scrappy, passionate 2 to 3 person operations. After they get that funding, what benchmark or criterion can they use to determine their readiness to expand? What is that thing that you're looking for them to expand?
Well, I mean, part of it is what are their goals? So what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? If it's certain beats, if it's certain whatever it is, and then do you have the people to do it? I've already talked about just having someone who's attentive to core operations, even if someone who's on wearing different, but what are your pain points and what kind of resources do you need? And what kind of, again, assessing who can do what on your team already and how can you bring people into the fold aren't necessarily full-time employees, because you're not going to have all the money you want for all the positions that you're going to need. So you need to be very creative. I mean, any startup is the same way. Can you get someone to do pro bono work for you, building your advisory board? Can you share some resource with another nonprofit in a startup nonprofit? Maybe they're not news or something, but it's someone who maybe does data science, data analytics. I mean, I see, or tech, as it's very hard to hire a CTO early on in the process, but most of these organizations are digital news organizations. They're digital. And you can, get text backs or whatever, but you're still going to have some technical expertise at some point. So you have to think creatively, volunteers, interns. But what is your plan? What are you trying to do? And what are the pain points or key critical path items to get there? And not the nice to have. So being very, very focused. Because a lot of people say, well, we need this, we need this. You need to really be focused and prioritize what I'm trying to do. Am I going to put this money or resource into another reporter? Or do I need to get someone or a consultant in to start looking and doing the data? Like, these are the trade-offs all the time. And then how can you start to bring in some other resources without maybe a full-time headcount? But that's where it's always, there's no generic playbook for some of this. It's really looking at where you are, what talents do you already have on the founders and beyond, and then what are you trying to do? And what are you trying to do to make a mark so you can also get more funding? For example, in Baltimore, maybe the arts beat is so important. Like, that was a critical to make a mark. So I assume you're very strategic about, this is how we're going to wedge in and we're going to add some value to our community. So we're going to invest in this person right away. It might be something very different for another community, what their needs are. They might have an eco disaster on, and so they're going to get recognition and focus on building reporting in a certain area. So it's all just thinking about your situation, how you differentiate, and what needs and resources you need to have at the moment. And then I think this whiteboard is that, it is fluid. The organizational structure, any CEO, it's always resource allocation at the end of the day, right? It's like, if I invest here now, I can't invest there now, and then having headlights into the future. I'm making this hire, but I know I'm going to need this person soon, and networking and, trying to get ahead of the game a little, but being flexible. There's a couple areas where I think people underestimate their needs. I think the community engagement area is really, really, really important. I don't know if you're familiar with LAist, the public radio. They have, Ashley's incredible. I've interviewed her a couple times, community engagement. That has been such a boon. While she reports into the editorial side, she's really a hybrid person because she's getting into the community. What are their needs? Then doing newsletters. And then all of a sudden the development people are like, oh, we can get people to fund that news. So she's become a fundraiser, marketing. Now she has an audience development manager, but she's like the go-between with the marketing, the fundraising, and the editorial team, and building this bridge. And the payoff is audience growth and then bringing in funders as well. So I liked hearing about one of your first hires, Madeleine, being the community person, who had all these other skills too. But that role seems really, really, if you can get someone who thinks like, they go into events, they can get sponsorships, they can know what reporting you might need that you haven't thought about. It can really propel growth if you get the right person in that area.
Thank you, Susan. Lisa, I think you had something to say on that with respect to the tech solutions. I also have another question for you when you're ready.
Sure. I mean, I just feel like every time Susan talks, my brain is going in 5 million ways. So thank you, Susan. But one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about being creative, so our CFO really takes joy in figuring out ways to make life easier for folks like me. Just in general, this is the thing that he wants to help kind of with other people like me all over the country. So he's found places like, he's the one that hooked us up with NewsPass. So that's a website that's very easy. Like luckily I don't have to do anything with it, but if I could, it's very easy for me to do that. He's found software that helps us get our freelancers paid quickly on both ends, with not me or somebody else kind of juggling a bunch of people sending emails looking for money, but also on their side, they're not waiting 3 or 4 months for payment for them, getting paid in July for something that happened last September. So finding those solutions, knowing that we had a very limited amount of funds, has taken us a really long way.
That's a great person on your team.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Pivot Funds partnership with JustWorks, which just helps with payroll and HR as well for teams like yours. So that's really good. The question I wanted to follow up with you, Lisa, about was how did you determine you were ready to bring on and sustain additional staff? Like, what was the determining factor for you?
My mental health. It was just, it's really, when we lost those 2 team members, it was unexpected. And so I had to pivot and quickly, because we have a set schedule. We are a paper that comes out every other week. That's what it is. That's how our budget is laid out. That's what happens. So no matter what, we still had to meet that goal. And so when we had that unexpected loss, it meant that I immediately had to start shifting and writing some things. We have, like I said, it's a priority. It's as important as the content we put out is making sure that we're giving young writers an opportunity. But that also means that slows us down because it's teaching as we go. So that meant that, again, I'm the most experienced writer sometimes. And I knew that could not be. I knew that it would not sustain us, because my brain is best put to use when I am forward thinking, when I'm creating a path for us to continue to exist. So that was very easy. It was also very easy for me to hire Terry, because again, I'm kind of operating the footprint of an alt weekly, and alt weeklies always have been known for their great arts coverage. And with Baltimore Beat especially, there's so many minority artists that don't get regular colored coverage, that we're providing a specific need for that. So because we're so small and limited, those needs are very pronounced.
If I could,
I was going to just ask you the same question if you would. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, something both Susan and Lisa said made me reflect on, one way we've kind of found a creative solution in hiring, and especially when it is so hard. Like when in El Tímpano's first 4 years or so, we were run mostly from one project grant to another. And at some point I had to start rejecting, actually, a lot of them were coming to us, asking us to apply. And I said, we need core support because this is unsustainable. We can't do one more project that won't allow us to hire a full-time person when it's just me managing another contractor while writing the grants, while doing editorial and everything, and managing different projects. And so that's why it's so important to just kind of know what your vision is, so that you can then determine whether a project grant does fit within that. And when it just doesn't make sense and will take you away from the resources that you need. There is one project grant that we did receive that it was a very sizable grant, didn't yet allow for hiring a full-time person. But what we did was, it was for civic science. And I knew we wanted to incorporate civic science into our work. I knew we also wanted to incorporate more artistic collaborations into our work, and had a little bit of funding that we could devote to that. So we created a position called Special Projects Manager that would both lead the civic science work and lead artistic collaborations kind of under the umbrella of special projects, and found a great person to hire full-time, and has really thrived in that position. But it does take a lot of that sort of just like creativity in terms of how to make it work.
I mean, you're pointing to an issue that I think is prevalent in our industry, which is these restricted grants and sort of how to deal with that. And I think that's a good creative solution to that.
Yeah, sorry. It's in every nonprofit, since I work across all the different people always want to give directly to the mission, right? So it's restricted for this program, that new choreographers or this or whatever it is. But Um, General operating grants are much harder because they're not as sexy. But to even in the restricted grants to figure out that there should be some amount for general operating, and I don't know, 20% or so. And some startups, haven't articulated that we're going to need this much to go for keeping the lights on, sort of thing as well. So I just want, which you probably already know, but if restricted grants are just nonprofit challenge in general. It's not just journalism.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it gives us a good sort of transition here with your comment.
One thing very quickly, I think that so when Lisa maybe said it, something about I knew I couldn't do this, right? Right. Is that to know thyself, to know what you can do, what skills you have and what you don't have. And that's okay. Because as a founder, you feel so responsible to do everything, but you're not going to be able to do everything. Even if you have every skill, you're going to stress out and have a nervous breakdown. But knowing yourself and what are the complementary people and skills that you need is really important. It seems so simple, but it's really important, founder.
Great point. We spoke a little bit about some strategies to sort of expand our teams here. I want to know, Lisa, are there any tools and strategies that you think you'd like to point to or highlight that would be worthwhile for people to consider?
So I don't know if I touched on it, but the Beat, like I said, used to be a for-profit paper, and we were dropped by our publisher. And we spent some time figuring out the nonprofit world. And the first place we found was Lion. And so I think that reaching out to other folks has been such a lifesaver for me. Like I said, and like Susan underlined, you cannot do everything. But the thing that I've found is that there are always people that are willing to help and give you information. And I think organizations like what Tracy's doing with Pivot, INN, all of those organizations are just amazing resources that even if you're not, like with INN, maybe you aren't even officially a member yet. We just became members. They're still just like great people that I've just chatted with at conferences, and just seeking out other people that can help and give you information has been a lifesaver for me.
Madeleine, was there anything that you had to add with respect to tools or strategies that you might suggest to folks?
Yeah, I was thinking about this tools question. There are a few I would name. One, just in terms of setting the salaries for our hires, I've used the MIT living wage calculator. That's just a good way of knowing what is a living wage where you are. Another one, we use Airtable across our organization for various things, including our hiring process, just to kind of keep track of candidates as they're coming in and the whole pipeline. I've mentioned a digital whiteboard. I like Miro, so I have a few whiteboards on Miro. And then one thing Susan was talking about, just like finding ways to outsource some of your operations. For El Tímpano, that's been our fiscal sponsor. So we are blessed to have an excellent local fiscal sponsor called Independent Arts and Media. And I kind of think of it as outsourcing a big chunk of El Tímpano's operations and administration. And so we could really focus on the programmatic and editorial and engagement work that we do. And so, that said, I've heard of many bad experiences with fiscal sponsors. So if that's something that you're looking into, I definitely encourage looking into it. Not every nonprofit needs to be an independent 501c3, but ask around, get references, talk to people. That's really how I learned about our fiscal sponsor. And because we've had such a great relationship with them, we've been able to grow without having to build our own governing board and kind of start all of those operational payroll processes and everything from scratch.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I know we're getting close to time. We do have a couple of questions in the queue, but I wanted to make sure I got to Susan. Actually, you're raising your hand. I'm coming right back to you right now. I wanted to make sure I got to Susan because I had a couple more questions for you. But did you want to add something on that last?
No, I was just going to Airtable is great. I mean, some of these things just make it so much easier and people apply. I will say that, recruiting takes a lot of time, right? It just takes a lot of time. And generally, the LinkedIn people post on LinkedIn, you'll be inundated usually with lots of people who may not be qualified. So I think being selective in where you post the position, and of course, in peer groups or things, but sometimes these forms they look really great, but it can take a lot of time to sit through all the applicants coming in. If you ask people to write a cover letter, it usually and that you will not review it unless they have or a letter of some sort. That is a forcing function for people who are not just serious or whatever, just apply. Making it too easy to apply is not necessarily a good thing because you have to sift through all. So I just wanted to add that. But I like Airtable for organizations a lot, really streamlined things. Yeah.
Also a big fan of Airtable. So Susan, let me just ask you real quick about the Pivot Fund's grants that went into rural parts of Georgia. And this is specific about rural communities and how they reach competitive and attract competitive talent. So much of what we're discussing is about, the tools and strategies for finding. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes it's really hard to just bring people in to your community. Can you speak to that? What is the strategies for something like that?
Well, I also think it gets into, who do you need to be in your community, maybe, and where can you get talent out of your community as a first question, right? So, if you're a community civic news organization, you probably need reporters who don't live in Idaho if you're covering it in Georgia. But there's other parts of your organization where you can attract talent from anywhere. They don't need to be on. So an accountant, a chief of staff, that may be ahead of you a little bit, but someone doing data analytics, you don't need everyone to be local. So the talent, how you think about talent, if you're in a place where there's less talent, where do you, like on the reporter side, that's a different question. You're probably going to need someone locally. And so where do you find that talent? Well, I don't know, writers, ad agencies, local universities, people who have journalism backgrounds. But I think on the business and operations side, marketing, revenue, fundraising, maybe more local, depends. You don't think that it all has to be local. I guess it's my main point. Look at each position and say, where can I open the net and where do I need to keep it local?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to turn to these questions in the Q&A. And if there's anybody that wants to drop another one in, by all means, please use the Q&A function. First one came from Renata. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. My apologies if I did not. What is your top suggestion for transforming a solopreneur news biz into a nonprofit? Maybe Susan, you can answer that one.
Into a nonprofit?
Yeah, solopreneur news biz into a nonprofit.
Well, I think we have someone, a couple of people on the team here, but
yeah, Lisa certainly is good through this.
They can start with a fiscal sponsor. I mean, states can make it, a long haul to get your 501c3 status. It's not a simple thing. It costs money. It costs effort. So starting with a fiscal sponsor, and then, a nonprofit means you have to raise money. So you have to have maybe someone who's.
Susan, can you break down what a fiscal sponsor is for us real quick? Just in case the members in the audience don't understand.
It's usually an organization that acts as your 501c3 in a way. So it has the status and then checks are paid to them, donations to them, because you can't accept it yourself. So being a nonprofit means you are not taxed on the money that's coming in the door, right? So the government doesn't want anyone to set up something that's really like a for-profit, and it's really a nonprofit. So like that also gets into your earned income versus your charitable giving, right? So if you're a startup and you have people paying ads and membership or paying for the newspaper, you're not going to be a nonprofit, right? You need to get philanthropic dollars in the door. But a starting point, instead of going through all the rigmarole to get the government approval, is starting with an organization that serves as your anchor. And
Gotcha.
they provide other things. I think Madeleine talked to that already. They can provide some financial oversight and all that sort of thing too. You have to give them money for it too.
You can typically find them. They're usually some of the largest nonprofits in your community. I just think of the Boston Foundation and organizations like that who serve as this sort of top or larger-ish nonprofit that gives to other nonprofits in the community. Catherine had a couple.
Giving it to other nonprofits versus, is that they're not necessarily fiscal sponsors?
They're not necessarily nonprofits, at least not in a 501c3. Yes. Catherine had a couple of other questions. I think she just deleted one, but she wanted to ask, advisory boards, startups, should they form community advisory boards?
I think
Yes.
a community engagement, if you're a local news organization, the more that you can get community members engaged, the better, because they're going to have insights as well as to bring resources to the table. So advisory board people who are behind this, again, and to be strategic maybe about your outreach. There may be some people who want to come, but we really need a lawyer. Can we get, a young lawyer who wants to do pro bono work for us? I think advisory boards are terrific. And then if you're 501c3, you have to have a board, and you report into them, by the way. They're the fiduciary. You're as the head of it, you report to the board of directors who have the fiduciary responsibility.
I'll just add to that really briefly. Because El Tímpano is fiscally sponsored, it means that we don't have a governing board. And so, but a lot of grant applications ask about your board. And so, but they allow us to instead describe our advisory board. So it does show kind of who is the wider community that's a part of this organization. So it helps both in that respect and in all the other ways that Susan mentioned, of really just being kind of other expert advisors to have kind of on your wider team.
And I think it's good the resources, but it's part of the growing process. A lot of organizations, they don't rely on a fiscal. If they grow and they're successful, they become independent 501c3s. So dealing with an advisory board, you're getting the practice of doing that for when you transition to being an independent 501c3 that must have a board.
Absolutely. Great suggestion there. Catherine's other question here, what are some examples of unrestricted grant programs we should consider? Madeleine, maybe this is something that you've experienced looking into. I don't know.
I'm sorry to say it took us earning a lot of project grants before we were able to really raise core support funding. I think that is kind of standard practice from what I've seen of small nonprofits. A lot of the foundations really kind of want to see your work and maybe support you through smaller grants until you're bigger, that they will make an investment in core support. That has been our experience, at least. But in terms of, especially our initial core support funding and the funders that were some of the early supporters of our work back when we were still just a one-person team, a lot of it actually, none of it was from journalism funders. A lot of it was actually from health-related funders, because they really saw and valued the importance of media that serves communities most impacted by health disparities. So I really encourage folks to look, well beyond journalism funders to see who else would support the sort of work that you're doing.
And if I could quickly add, if it is very restricted, it's okay to not pursue that. like because I'm so small, like there's certain pots of money that it's not worth me to go after because it comes with so much extra labor. I also would like to complain. I wish I could remember, but someone just did a survey that showed that people tend to offer less unrestricted money to Black and Brown organizations. But yeah, don't feel like every grant that lands on your desk is something that you have to pursue, because you have to look at overall where's your energy going, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's not worth it.
Right. Thank you for that, Lisa. We are at time, and I do want to thank our guests, our attendees who have put in questions and have stuck with us here. Thank you all for joining us. And I want to thank Tracy and the Pivot Fund for putting together this amazing group of people. Thank you. And I want to thank the Knight Foundation again for supporting important conversations like this. So thank you all. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.